You're listening to the Joe and Rosa Show, proclaiming the gospel through word and through song.
Hi, and welcome to the Joe and Rosa Show. I'm Joe.
And I'm Rosa.
And with us today we have writer and blogger Rachel Britton. How are you today, Rachel?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. It is our pleasure. And I wanted to start off with what you feel God has laid on your heart. If you'd share with our listeners what that message is about the need to spend time with God every day. Tell us what it is that you have learned in that regard, please.
Well, God's definitely been speaking to me recently, and He's told me that His longing is for people to spend time with Him and to talk with Him. And I feel like He's saying to me, Rachel, will you get people to do that? And I think sometimes, praying is very hard, and I know that I have found it hard in the past. I used to run away from prayer. I didn't think I was any good at it, and I used to think it was for people who were much holier than me. But God spent time showing me that He just wants me to spend time with Him, and He wants me to be honest with Him about my failings, my concerns, my hopes, and my dreams. And, as I've practiced prayer with and speaking to Him, that's drawn me into a much deeper and richer relationship with Him. So one of my favorite verses in the Bible is Isaiah 65, verse 2. And it says, in it God says, all day long I've held out my hands to people who walk in their own ways. And I think it gives us a really beautiful picture of God just waiting in the wings for us to turn and spend time with Him. And then when we look further down the chapter, the same chapter, 65, and at verse 24, it tells us what happens when we do turn to God. It says, before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. And that's another beautiful picture of God just showing us how eager He is for us to spend time with Him and pray to Him.
Absolutely, because He is our Father, and as His children, He wants to spend time with us. And you actually wrote a book about prayer. Can you tell our listeners what your book is called and a little bit about that as well?
Yes, I'd love to. My book is called Prayer Zone Workout. To help you remember that title, prayer, it's not a book just to read about prayer, but it quickly helps you to start practicing prayer. Zone is like the athletes who get into a zone when they're exercising. They become so focused that everything fades into the background, and that's how we want to be when we're having conversation, when we're praying to God. And then workout, because we can view prayer as healthy exercise for our lives. So prayer zone workout. And it's for people who say, I want to pray more often, but I get distracted, or I start with good intentions, but I find it hard to continue, or my mind wanders. I think we all have that problem with prayer. And then also it's the people who say, I want to exercise more regularly, but I find it difficult. So I've taken those two activities, prayer and exercise, and that's something as simple as walking, and I've put them together into just a simple routine that helps us to become healthy in our souls and also in our physical bodies.
Yes, and I think that it also ties in with the fact that prayer is often considered to be a spiritual discipline, but it's also just spending time with your Heavenly Father. And so you've talked about some of the obstacles that people find that would keep them from prayer. What are some of the benefits? What are some of the things that would motivate people to basically make that part of what they do every day?
I think the thing that the motivation comes from making our hearts. The Bible talks about the heart as our inner being, and it tells us that God looks at the heart And when we spend time with him in prayer, we have that opportunity of making our hearts healthier with him, so we can bring all those issues that we have in our lives. And when we're in prayer with him, we can become kinder, we can become more loving, more patient, more joyful. All those opportunities happen through prayer.
Absolutely. And so that's your book, Prayer Zone Workout. And I know that on your blog recently, you've been having a Be Bold series. You talk about being bold in prayer. Sometimes that's a little intimidating. We feel that we can't approach the King of the universe in a bold way. Some of us are actually rather fearful when it comes to that. But the scripture actually says to be bold. So tell us a little bit about that. What does it look like to be bold in prayer?
Well, the one story that I tell is when I was a child, I used to have to dress up to go to church. And because I was a little bit of a tomboy, I'd rather have gone in my shorts. But we're a British family, and my mother would say to me, you wouldn't wear your shorts to go and see the Queen, would you? So I had to dress up. And I think sometimes we approach God like that in prayer. We think that we need to look respectable. But God, because he looks at our hearts and not our outward appearance, we can actually be bold with him and tell him everything that's going on inside us, because he knows about it anyhow. We don't need to be respectable, but we can still be respectful to God.
Absolutely. I also have found that as well. Sometimes we make it such a point to be, we are supposed to be holy, but we make it such a point to almost be something we're not, that it actually makes us cold. We actually kind of draw away instead of come to, whereas Jesus says, come to me. He basically, the message is just come to me as you are, but just come. And I did want to touch on something that you've been writing about lately also, and I think it ties in. When we're talking about prayer, we're talking about things that matter, eternal things versus temporal things. Can you tell our listeners, sort of paint the picture for this realization that you came to when visiting some ruins?
Yes, so in the summer I had the opportunity to go to the Mediterranean, and I was on the island of Crete. And while we were there, we went to visit some ruins. The place is called Knossos. And it just struck me, this was part of the Minoan civilization, and it was a very rich civilization at that time, thousands of years ago, around about the same time as Abraham. And now it's just complete ruins. And they don't know what happened, but suddenly the civilization disappeared. And it just struck me about how temporal things like our cities and the way we live, how temporal those things are, and that how we need to hold on to the things that are lasting, and that God has told us that his word is lasting. So that was the impact that it had on me.
Yes, and I do think that in our culture we absolutely do get wrapped up on things that absolutely would pass away. So as far as, if we've got listeners on the other side wondering, I'm not sure what are the eternal things. I work my job, I put food on the table, but what other things are there? What are the things that are eternal? What are those things, and how do I pursue those?
Well, I think one ways to pursue it is to read the Bible and to find God's promises in there, and that's what he tells us is eternal, the things that he promises for us, to give us a future, to give us a hope. These are the things that, when life is difficult, we can hold on to. When things seem to be falling apart around us, we can keep God to keep God to his promises. And I think, one way to do that is again through prayer. And we can say to God, this is what you promise in your word, in the Bible. This is the promise I see. But I don't see it happening in my life, but I'm going to trust you and keep you to that promise.
Yes, and a lot of times I've noticed that on your blog you write about knowing your worth. You talk about what our identity is, and I really believe that ties into seeking our worth in these things which are ultimately temporary, and that we end up ignoring eternal things. But so as far as finding our worth, somebody's on the other side of this, they're listening, and they want to know, well, what is my worth tied to? How do I find that, and what does that look like?
Okay, I think, well, if they were to go to my blog, it brings me back again to the series that I have, the Be Bold Girls series. Lots of these are stories from just ordinary women who's sharing how they're being bold and how they're finding their worth through God and through a relationship with Jesus Christ. And again, the stories tell that message that our worth really comes through that relationship with Jesus.
Right, and I think that all ties in very beautifully together, that our worth ties in Jesus. We don't need to seek value from temporal things. We can turn to the eternal. And one of those things is having that close relationship and walk with Jesus Christ and praying to him and talking to him about our issues. And I love how all of that ties together. And I would ask you if you could tell our listeners where they can find you online and where they can find your book, Prayer Zone Workout.
Okay, your listeners can find me online at rachelbritton.com. That's RachelBritton, rachelbritton.com. And also, they can find my book on Amazon. The price of the paperback is $9.99.
Absolutely. Well, that just sounds about perfect. And so I thank you so much for sharing the beautiful truths of God's word with us today, and for taking the time to be on the Joe and Rosa show. Thank you so much, Rachel Britton.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Joe and Rosa. It's been great. I've loved it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on the Joe and Rosa Show. We'll be back again next week, same channel, same time. You can find us online at joeandrosahopkins.com. You can find Rosa's blog at lifeinsidethehouseontherock.com. You can find this show and more like it on YouTube, along with our music. Just go on there and look for Joe and Rosa Hopkins, or you can go to youtube.com/Joe and Rosa Hopkins. You can find Rosa's blog at lifeinsidethehouseontherock.com, and you can find our shows and music on soundcloud.com. Search for Joe and Rosa Hopkins there. And we certainly do appreciate you spending your Sunday with us, a little bit of time here. And we would encourage you to check out Rachel's book, Prayer Zone Workout. I do know prayer is a very, very important thing. People tend to diminish how important prayer is. Prayer is about as important as it gets. And I would certainly encourage you to pray in your daily life, and talk to God. He is your Father. And thank you very much for spending your time with us.